Okay, let's just jump right in. Think about these names for a second. Alligator Alcatraz, the Devil's Punch Bowl.
Hmm,
What images pop into your head? They sound pretty chilling, don't they?
they really do.
And while they're actual places, this deep dive we're doing today shows they symbolize something, well, much deeper than just spots on a map.
Absolutely. We're digging into a really potent blog post today, one that uses these two uh, very unsettling sites as a kind of
The
lens
lens for what, exactly?
to look closely at the uncomfortable silence and maybe even, the complicity of corporate America, both historically and right now when it comes to human rights issues.
Right. So our mission today is to try and unpack how corporations respond, or maybe more accurately, how they don't respond to injustice.
Yeah, tracing those patterns from the past to the present.
And thinking about what that means for, well, for all of us, really, and demanding accountability. We're pulling out the key ideas from this source to understand that link between corporate interests and humanitarian concerns.
Exactly. So let's set the scene with these two locations first because they really deliver a stark message. First up, Alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah.
This name, it was given to a detention facility set up during the Trump administration. It's described as a noteworthy chapter in the whole story of U.S. detention and immigration policies.
And it sounds like the place lives up to the name.
It does. The source mentions vast swamps imposing barbed wire fences, things that create this real atmosphere of confinement and, frankly, despair.
So it's not just holding people, it's a symbol.
It serves as a stark reminder, yeah. A reminder of the ongoing struggles in the U.S. with immigration enforcement, human rights, those big, difficult issues.
Okay, so that's the contemporary example. What about the Devil's Punch Bowl? That sounds historical.
It is. It takes us back, near Natchez, Mississippi. And this place is described as a haunting echo of the injustices faced by freed black individuals right after the Civil War.
After the war, what happened there?
Well, many people who had just been freed sought refuge there, hoping for safety, for real freedom. But what they found was, well, the opposite.
How so?
The conditions were just tragic. The source highlights totally inadequate food sources, leading to widespread starvation. People were desperate.
That's horrific. And was anyone helping?
That's the troubling part. The analysis points to the complicity of the Union Army, who apparently just turned a blind eye to how bad things were. It suggests a real systemic neglect.
Turning a blind eye. Wow, so starvation and what else?
On top of that, there was an almost complete lack of medical care. So diseases like cholera, smallpox, they just ran rampant. Countless lives were lost.
It sounds like an atrocity.
The source calls it one of the darkest chapters in American history, an atrocity fueled by systemic racism and neglect, a really brutal reality.
Okay, so you have Alligator Alcatraz now and the Devil's Punch Bowl back then. What's the connection the source is making?
It draws this really sharp parallel. It argues that, much like the freed black individuals trapped at the Devil's Punch Bowl, immigrants today often face similar things in detention centers, insufficient resources, harsh conditions.
So it's suggesting a pattern repeating itself.
Exactly. An echo from the past and the present. And it poses this question, does this parallel call for a kind of reckoning about America's past and its present?
A reckoning. That's a strong word. And that leads into the corporate angle.
It does. It brings us to this idea of a profound disconnection in corporate America. The source suggests that just having a place like Alligator Alcatraz existing throws a spotlight on the significant silence from big companies.
Right. Raising questions about their ethical responsibilities, yeah.
Precisely. Where do they stand?
So why the silence? What's the analysis there?
Well, it really boils down to priorities. The source argues that profitability and shareholder value often come first. They just get prioritized, sidelining moral questions in favor of business growth.
It's a calculation then, not just an oversight.
Seems that way. And this constant push for market expansion, it can kind of inadvertently shut down any impulse a company might have to speak out against inhumane practices.
So it fosters a specific kind of culture.
Yeah, a no news is good news mentality almost. Staying silent feels safer, avoids potential backlash that could hurt the bottom line, hurt their market position. Like a corporate code of silence, maybe?
But surely that's changing. I mean, people expect more now, don't they?
That's a key point. The landscape is shifting. Consumers today, they do demand more transparency, more ethical behavior. So that calculated silence is becoming a much riskier strategy.
Okay, and the source links this profit focus specifically to the Trump administration, too.
It does. It talks about how policies during that time, especially deregulation and big tax breaks, kind of poured fuel on that profit-first fire across different industries.
And what were the effects, the real-world impacts?
Well, the analysis points to consequences like hazardous working conditions, environmental damage, erosion of labor rights.
And who bears the brunt of that?
Often, it disproportionately impacts marginalized communities.
Mm.
It's not just abstract policy. It hits real people hard.
On the tax breaks.
The source argues they mostly benefited the wealthiest and the largest corporations, sometimes directly at the expense of public services that, low-income communities really rely on, weakening the safety net.
It paints a pretty bleak picture. Does the source look further back historically?
It does. It argues there's a disturbing pattern of this kind of neglect. Think about World War II, for instance, the internment of Japanese Americans.
How was the corporate role there?
According to this analysis, many companies actually prioritize profit by helping facilitate that mass incarceration.
Facilitating it? How?
Profiting from government contracts related to the internment camps themselves. It shows a disregard for the human consequences, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's stark. Any other examples?
It also points to the Jim Crow era in the South, how companies there just willingly went along with segregationist policies.
So they weren't just passive bystanders.
No, the argument is they became active participants in upholding that system of racial discrimination. It sort of cemented this idea that maybe corporations could operate outside of ethical considerations when it came to these big societal injustices. Profit over principle.
So these examples, they build a case for a consistent pattern, right? Corporate negligence on social equity.
Exactly. And what really jumps out is how slow corporations often are to react. It seems like they only really move when there's massive external pressure demanding change.
Which makes you wonder, what does it actually take?
And that leads us right into this idea of the moral debt of silence.
Moral debt. Explain that.
The source argues that corporate silence isn't neutral. It's not passive. It actually contributes to this moral debt. When big, influential companies stay silent, it kind of implicitly signals that unethical practices are okay, or at least tolerable.
It allows things to continue.
Right. It allows them to persist without real challenge or accountability.
And are there tangible consequences for the companies themselves, beyond the moral aspect?
Oh, absolutely. And increasingly so. We're seeing severe damage to reputations now. Big public backlash, calls for boycotts, protests.
Which hits their bottom line eventually.
Directly impacts sales, market
Yeah.
share. And it can create this really damaging cycle. Neglect leads to more violations, which leads to more backlash, which erodes brand loyalty, consumer trust.
Puts them at a disadvantage.
A significant competitive disadvantage. Plus, you have this growing regulatory focus on corporate accountability. The rules are tightening. Staying silent might not even be a viable option for much longer.
Okay, so if silence is risky and potentially costly, what's the alternative? What's the path forward according to this source?
Well, it really emphasizes activism and resistance.
Hmm.
And it frames it as a collective responsibility, something for everyone.
Like what kind of actions?
Protesting, for one. It's described as a visible way to show public feeling. It gets attention, amplifies voices, leads to more scrutiny. Showing up matters.
And beyond protesting?
Voting. That's highlighted as crucial for systemic change. Electing representatives who actually prioritize things like environmental justice and, importantly, corporate accountability. Using the political process.
Makes sense. What else?
Boycotting. The power of hitting them where it hurts, financially. Withdrawing your money sends a really clear signal that unethical practices just aren't acceptable. It can cause real financial pain.
So it's about individuals taking action collectively.
Exactly. The source stresses that shared responsibility. Advocating for justice isn't just for activists. It rests with all of us.
Okay, so if someone listening wants to do something, what are the actionable steps? What can you do?
The source suggests a few concrete things. One is conscious purchasing, making deliberate choices to support companies that actually have a good track record on corporate social responsibility, CSR, how they treat people and the planet.
Using your wallet.
Precisely. And then there's social media.
How does that fit in?
It's a powerful tool, right? For amplifying calls for accountability, using hashtags, sharing posts, signing petitions, building momentum online.
Getting the word out.
Yeah. And finally, direct engagement.
Like writing letters.
Writing letters, yes. Trying to engage in dialogue with company representatives, supporting advocacy groups that are already pushing for these changes.
So it's not just one thing, it's a combination of approaches.
And persistence is key. That's really For where accountability isn't just, wished for, but actually expected,
Right. It becomes the norm.
hopefully.
So wrapping this up then, we've looked at Alligator Alcatraz and the Devil's Punch Bowl. These really harrowing symbols.
Stark reminders, yeah, of unchecked injustice, systemic neglect.
And they shine a light on corporate America's role. A role that's pivotal, but, as the source argues, often unfulfilled when it comes to ethics.
A role often marked by that silence we talked about.
And the takeaway seems clear. There's an urgent need for us as individuals to stay vigilant, be proactive.
Whether that's through local activism, supporting human rights groups, or just holding those who perpetuate inequality accountable in whatever way we can. It's a collective effort.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought to leave you with, stemming from that source material. It mentions corporations are often slow to respond unless external pressures force them to.
That point about external pressure.
Yeah. So if that's true, what does it really take to shift corporate behavior, to move beyond just reacting when they get caught towards genuinely embedding ethics into how they operate?
To make it intrinsic, not just reactive damage control.
Exactly. How do we make sure the lessons from history, from places like the Devil's Punch Bowl, actually lead to lasting justice? What do you think is the ultimate catalyst for that kind of deep, sustained change?